So the topic is Bein Kiddush Lahavdala. So I want to discuss some Yesodis of Kiddush, and then from there to try to understand some Yesodis about the inyan of Havdalah. We know that the mitzvah of Kiddush is a mitzvah d'oraisa. I'm sure you've heard this many times in the past week or two. We learned from the pasuk of Zocher Sir Shabbos Lakadshay. So from there we learned that the mitzvah of Kiddush to Mekadosh the Shabbos b'dvarim is a mitzvah d'oraisa. If you roiv rishonim, the mitzvah of Kiddush ala kais is a din d'Rabbanan. Maybe we'll soon talk about this a little bit more b'hemshech tashir. But if you roiv rishonim, that's definitely how we paskin. The mitzvah of Kiddush ala kais is a din d'Rabbanan. The chiv d'oraisa to Mekadosh haShabbos b'dvarim, and midrabanan Chazal and Masak, and the Kiddush has to be elayayim. There seems to be a very yesodistic machlokes rishonim as to what is the hagdara of the mitzvah of Kiddush. What's the mahus of the mitzvah d'oraisa of Kiddush b'dvarim? Let's start with the Rambam. The Rambam says in Perek Chav Tes Halacha Aleph in Hilchos Shabbos, mitzvah saseh ben ater lekadosh is yom Shabbos b'dvarim shnemar zocher is yom Shabbos lekadosh kleimar zochreu zechiras shvach v'kiddush. The Rambam says that the yesod of the mitzvah of Kiddush is zochreu zechiras shvach v'kiddush. Tzarich lo zochreu b'knisasei b'yitziasei b'knisasei b'kiddush hayom u'b'yitziasei b'Havdalah. The Rambam shtells avek beforish that the side of the mitzvah of Kiddush is to say divrei shvach about Shabbos. The word Kiddush, according to the Rambam, doesn't mean that I'm shafting the Kedusha Shabbos. Shabbos is not a Kedusha which needs to be shaft. Shabbos, like the Gemara says, Amsachim Kuf Yud Zayin, is Kviya V'Kaima. The word Kiddush means, according to the Rambam, that the mitzvah is to say divrei shvach about Shabbos, that by saying divrei shvach, the Shabbos will be niskadish. That will elevate and be mekadosh Shabbos. I'm not shafting the Kedusha Shabbos. As always, Mavur in the Rambam, that's what the Rambam farteiches the mitzvah of Kiddush. Now, we also see in the Rambam, this is going to get back to Mitzvah Hashem, the Rambam says, Mafurish, B'tzarech l'zercheu b'knisasei b'yitziasei, b'knisasei b'kiddush hayom b'yitziasei b'Havdalah. The Rambam says, Mafurish, that Havdalah is learned out of the mitzvah of Zocher Shem Shabbos Lakadshay, and it's a chiluk of the mitzvah d'oraisa of Kiddush. So the Rambam learns that the mitzvah of Havdalah is d'oraisa, and the makar for the mitzvah of Havdalah is from the pasuk of Zocher Shem Shabbos Lakadshay. We'll get back to that. That's how the Rambam seems to learn the inyan of Kiddush. The Ramban in Chumash, the Ramban in Parshas Yisroi, Perek Chav Pasuk Lamed Ches, the Ramban seems to have a different Havana in the side of the mitzvah of Kiddush. The Ramban says, the Lashon Ramban is, Aval Rabbi Seinu Oid Boy Medrash Mimilas LeKadshay Shene Kadshehu Ke'in V'Kidashtem Eis Shnasa Chamishim Shana Shaiton Kiddush Bebezdin Loimar B'Yovel Mekudish Mekudish.
Ramban, please. No, I'm just asking her Pesach, but the Ramban on. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
The Rav should continue. It's coming. Just continue. It's going to come on.
Avkan Siva Shenizkar Yom Shabbos Bekachenu Esay. So the Ramban says that we're learning out of the word lekadshay. When the Torah says Zochar Yom Shabbos lekadshay, the Ramban seems to madgish the lekadshay that the side of the mitzvah of Kiddush is kipshutai. The Itaka be Mekadosh Shabbos. The same way there's a musig by the Shnas HaYovel. We're going to have in a few parshas and parshas Bahar v'kidashtem eis Shnasa Chamishim Shana, that there's a mitzvah on Bezdin to Mekadosh the Shnas HaYovel to say Shana Zum Kudeshes. And this Amira of Bezdin is Ma'akiv. If Bezdin doesn't make the Kedushas Yovel, it's not Chal the Kedushas Yovel. So the Ramban Afkan Tziva Shenizgar Yom Shabbos Bekachenu Eisai. The Torah is mechayiv that we have to be mekadosh Shabbos, or pasha b'kepshutai, we're shafting the kedusha Shabbos. So according to the Ramban, the mitzvah of Kiddush d'oraisa of kacheu b'dvarim has nothing to do with saying divrei shvach about the gadlus and the mile of Shabbos. It's a kepshutai. It's a mitzvah to mekadosh Shabbos, to shaf the kedusha Shabbos. Now this is very difficult to understand, because as we mentioned before, it's a mefurish Gemara Psachim. The Gemara says mefurish that Shabbos is kviya v'kaima. We don't need. Right, the Gemara says that's an afkamina between Shabbos and Yontiv. We say Mekadosh Shabbos, we say Mekadosh Yisrael Vazmanim, and the Gemara says in Psachim that by Yontiv, where Kedushas Yontiv is totally in Bezdin, so there we say Mekadosh Yisrael Vazmanim, Mekadosh Yisrael the Kachinu Vazmanim. When it comes to Shabbos, Shabbos is Kviya V'Kaima. There we say Mekadosh Shabbos. Shabbos is a Kedusha which is Chal automatically. It's not totally in the day of the month. It's not totally in the Kiddush HaChidush. It's not totally in the Kiddush Hashana. It's Kviya V'Kaima. The Yom HaShvi has Kedusha Shabbos. So what does the Ramban mean that there's a mitzvah of Kiddush to Mekadosh Shabbos? Bishlam, the Rambam is very geschmack. The Rambam learns, I'm not shafing the Kedusha Shabbos. According to the Rambam, the mitzvah is to say divrei shvach and to magdil, to elevate the Shabbos, that the Shabbos should be niskadesh be'einenu. But according to the Ramban, that the mitzvah is like Yovel to mekadesh Shabbos. What does it mean that you're shafing the Kedusha Shabbos? I was thinking, maybe, I don't know if it fully answers the kasha, but you find such a musig, even Dinei Torah, there's a halacha of Kedushas Bechor. A Bechor Behema Torah, when a Behema Torah has a Bechor, the Bechor has a Kedusha and has Dinei carbon. Now the din is that, as opposed to most Kedushas Karbanos, where you have to makdish the carbon, and a person is makdish with the Kedushas Peh, or he's makdish the Mincha with the Klishares, where he shafs the Kedusha, Bechor is Kedushas Merechem. The Gemara says in many places that the Rechem is Makadish once the Bechor is born, so it's Chalat automatic Kedusha, and it's brought as a carbon. However, there is a mitzvah lakdishay. Rashi and Chumash brings in a Parshas Chukaisai. It's mentioned in a few places in the Gemara. There is a mitzvah for the Baal HaBechor to say Harei Kodesh. And Kepshut it's a din deraisa. We learn out of a pasuk that there's a mitzvah to say Harei Kodesh on the Bechor. Even though if a person wouldn't say that dibur of Harei Kodesh, the Kedushas Bechor would be Chal Me'elav. That's Mefurish Gemaras that the Rechem is Mekadosh the Bechor. You don't need the Amir of Harei Kodesh to makdish the Kedushas Bechor. Of a fundestwegen, there's a mitzvah, kipshut, it's a din deraisa, that a person is supposed to say Harei Kodesh on the Bechor. So it's taka difficult to understand, but Vashteta is that there is such a musag in the Torah that there's a mitzvah to act as if I'm being makdish the Bechor, even though the Kedushas Bechor is Chal Me'elav. And if I'm not going to say that Harei Kodesh, it'll be Chal the Kedushas Bechor even without my Amira. But there's a mitzvah deraisa to act as if I'm being makdish the Kedushas Bechor. Even if I say the words Harei Kodesh kipshutai, the Kedusha is not Chal Mikoyach Me'amiru. The Kedusha is Chal because the Rechem is Makadosh. But Fundestwegen, we see such a musik that there's a din deraisa, that there's a halacha that a person has to act as if he's being Makadosh the Bechor and say Harei Kodesh. If he doesn't say it, it's Chal the Kedusha's Bechor. But there's still a mitzvah to Makdish the Bechor. So it could be that this Ramban is learning Kiddush also. Even though Versteht sich by Yovel, there you're shafing the Kedusha. And by Shabbos, as we mentioned, it's before in the Gemara Pesachim that Kiddush Shabbos is Kviya V'Kaima, but the mitzvah of Kiddush is to act as if I'm being Mekadosh the Kiddush Shabbos. I'm talking about making the Kiddush Shabbos. The Kiddush Shabbos is Chal Me'elav, but there's a mitzvah, as by Bechor, there's a din deraisa to say Harei Kodesh, Hagam, the Kedusha is Chal Me'erechem, but there's a mitzvah to act as if I'm shafing the Kedusha. So too when it comes to Shabbos, the Ramban learns that there's a mitzvah to say Kiddush as if I'm shafing, as if I'm shafing the Kedusha Shabbos, even though the Kiddush Shabbos is Chal Me'elav. That would be a shtickle Havan in the Ramban. I got to find afterwards that the Moedim Mizbanim says this. The Moedim Mizbanim in the Shiurim and Pesachim, he taka says this Tushtel to the inyan of Bechor Behema Torah. So we have a machlekes. I'm sure this has been mentioned many times in the past few weeks. We have a yisodistic machlekes, the Rambam and the Ramban, as to what's the Havan of Kiddush. According to the Rambam, the Havan of the mitzvah of Kiddush deraisa is to say divrei shvach about the mile and the gedula of Shabbos. And according to the Ramban, the mitzvah is kipshutai to be Makadosh, or as we're explaining it, to act as if I'm being Makadosh the Kedusha Shabbos. Now we mentioned before that the Rambam, besides for teaching the side of the mitzvah of Kiddush, the Rambam says before that the mitzvah of Havdalah is a deraisa. The Rambam says v'tzarich l'zachreu b'knisasei b'yitziyasei b'knisasei b'kiddushay b'yitziyasei b'Havdalah. It would seem to be that the Rambam had such a girsa. The Gemara Pesachim lefanenu, the Gemara says Zachreu al hayom, Zachreu b'knisasei. The Gemara doesn't say b'yitziyasei. The Mefarish and Nazir does bring a lashon of b'yitziyasei. They quoted Mechilta that there's a girsa in the Mechilta that also has a lashon of b'yitziyasei. It would seem to you that the Rambam is going with this girsa in the Mechilta that a chelik of the mitzvah of Zachar is to be zeicher the Shabbos b'knisasei b'yitziyasei. The Rambam seems to say Mefurish that the mitzvah of Havdalah is learned out of the mitzvah of Zachar. Now, this does not mean to say that according to the Rambam, if a person, let's say a person makes Kiddush and doesn't make Havdalah, was he Mekayim B'chatzi Shir of the mitzvah? He wasn't Mekayim his mitzvah? No. Avada, there's two mitzvahs. A person makes Kiddush, he's Mekayim the mitzvah of Zachar. Person makes Havdalah, he's also Mekayim the mitzvah of Zachar. They're not ma'akev each other, but they're both Nichlal in the mitzvah of Zachar. In Minyan and mitzvahs, there's one mitzvah of Zachar. There's a mitzvah of Zachar to be Zeicher the Shabbos b'knisasei b'yitziyasei, to Mekadosh the Shabbos b'knisasei, and to be Zeicher the Shabbos b'havdalasei b'yitziyasei. I think the Rambam is going l'shitasei. The Rambam learns that what you say to the mitzvah of Kiddush, you say to the mitzvah of Kiddush is to say divrei shvach about Shabbos. The side of the mitzvah of Kiddush, not to shaf the Kiddush Shabbos, not even to act as if I'm shafting the Kiddush Shabbos. The side of the mitzvah of Kiddush is to say divrei shvach about the Maila and the Gedula of Shabbos. According to the Rambam, it's very moving why Havdalah is number one deraisa and number two learned out of Zachar. Because according to the Rambam, if the side of the mitzvah of Kiddush is to be magdil and to show the chashivas of Shabbos, the hashlama of that mitzvah is to be mavdil, to show the separation of Shabbos, side when you go in, side when you go out. You come to Shabbos for Friday. Friday is a vacha dikatag. You come to Ryan and Shabbos, biknisasei, or like we'll see, samach liknisasei, you say divrei shvach about the chashivas of the yom haba. You're magdil the kedusha of the Shabbos that's coming in. So you're showing that Shabbos is a great day. When Shabbos finishes, umeged areis from Shabbos into Motzei Shabbos. Motzei Shabbos is a vacha dikatag. When I'm leaving the kedusha Shabbos into the vach, so I say hamavdul ben kodesh l'choil, and by saying the words hamavdul ben kodesh l'choil, I'm showing the Shabbos is under a tug. I'm not mavdul between Sunday and Monday. By saying havdalah, it's sufficient Shabbos and Zuntig, I'm showing Shabbos is under a tug. When ich kum rein in Shabbos, I'm saying the Shabbos is under a tug. I'm saying divrei shvach about Shabbos. When I'm going out of Shabbos, I'm saying the Shabbos wasn't under a tug, and now I'm going back to the vacha dikatag. So the mitzvah of havdalah is a hashlama to the mitzvah of kiddush. Again, I'm not saying that they're ma'akiv each other. That if a person made kiddush and he didn't make havdalah or vice versa, he definitely made kind of mitzvah of zachar. But the mitzvah of zachar b'shleimus is to be zeicher the Shabbos b'knisasei and to be zeicher the Shabbos b'yitziasei. Now, nach the Rambam, it's very, very geschmack and move on why number one havdalah is deraisa and why number two havdalah is learned out of zachar. Because according to the Rambam, it's two sides of the same coin. The mitzvah of zachar is to be zeicher the Shabbos b'dvarim dahainu l'zachrehu zchiras shvach v'kiddush. To say that Shabbos is under a tug, Shabbos is a grace tug. By saying when Shabbos comes in, that sekumt yes, that Shabbos, that's a grace tug. And when Shabbos leaves, by saying that right now I'm separating from the Shabbos that I just experienced to the vacha dikateg, that is how I'm saying divrei shvach about Shabbos b'tziasei u'b'knisasei. So according to the Rambam, it's very moving why havdalah is deraisa. Now let's go back to the Ramban for a second. According to the Ramban, that the mitzvah of Kiddush is not a mitzvah to shaf the Kiddush, it's not a mitzvah to say divrei shvach and about the Maila Shabbos. It's a mitzvah kepshutai. The mitzvah is to shaf the Kiddush Shabbos. Even though Kiddush Shabbos is kfi v'kaima, but there's a mitzvah, like we explained, to act as if I am being Mekadosh Shabbos. If either Ramban, l'chayra, it's impossible to learn that the mitzvah of Havdalah is nichlal and zachar. Because the mitzvah of zachar, according to the Ramban, is to create the Kiddush Shabbos. There's no pshat in saying that when I make Havdalah, I'm being mafkia the Kiddush Shabbos. You're not mafkia the Shabbos. You could say I'm acting as if I'm making the Shabbos. I can't act as if I'm knocking off Shabbos. Shabbos is over and Shabbos is over. Whether you make Havdalah or not, there is a halacha. You can't do malacha before Havdalah. There's b'skrav about that. That's a tzvei tzugya. But as far as the Kedusha Shabbos, as far as the Isser malacha of Shabbos, when it comes to Tzesek Echavim, whenever you hold Tzeis, that's when Shabbos is finished. Your Havdalah is not making Ois Shabbos. I can't make Shabbos Ois. I can act as if I'm making Shabbos. I can't act as if I'm making Ois Shabbos. So the Ramban, l'shitosai, that he learns that the side of the mitzvah of Kiddush is to shaf the Kiddush Shabbos, and the Hadgasha is not the Zachar. The Hadgasha is the Lekadshay. The Zachar is Shema Shabbos Lekadshay, that I'm being makdish. I'm acting as if I'm shafing the Kiddush Shabbos. The Ramban l'chayra cannot learn that Havdalah is learned out of the mitzvah of Zachar. The Ramban will have to learn one of the two. Either the Ramban will learn, like the Rishonim, that the Chayvus Havdalah is a Drabanan, and there's no mitzvah d'oraisa of Havdalah b'chlal, or the Ramban will learn, like the Maggid Mishnah says, on this Ramban, Perek Chavtes Halacha Aleph, the Maggid Mishnah brings down that there is another makar for the mitzvah of Havdalah, and that is based on a Gemara in Shavuos. The Gemara in Shavuos, Daf Yud Ches and Beis says, Kol hamavdel al yayin v'motzei Shabbos, Zeicha is going to have banim scharim. To do that, Reb Chaim Kanievsky, he tells a lot of people who want to have banim scharim that they should makbid to mavdel al yayin. It's based on this Gemara. Kol mavdel al yayin motzei Shabbos, havli banim scharim. You learn out of the pasuk in Parsha Shmini, la havdil ben hakodesh to ben hachol. Now the Gemara Shavuos doesn't say this is the makar for Havdalah. The Gemara says we learn from over here that if someone is mavdel al yayin, it's hizayich the grace zachin. But the Maggid Mishnah says, and there's a Yad Ramah like this, or Bachan and Beir brings down. There's Rishonim that say this, that this is a makar for the mitzvah of Havdalah. To say Stazay, according to the Ramban.
Just the elders are going to ask this. Reb Chaim's admonition is Lafuke Chamar Medina. That's what he means to say. Oh yeah, I remember. Grape juice. What is he trying to say?
I think both. The way I heard it was lafuki both. That's what I heard.
Okay, yain means yain pashut. Okay,
So, yeah.
and Chaim holds like Hishver that yain is not grape juice is not yain. Correct? That's.
I'm sure he holds that you create some. You have a grape juice in Chamar Medina, but for some reason, I guess he learned that you have to mekayim the mimer of Chazal kipshutai. So I guess there's a mile of yain. I guess.
Right. No, you want the bracha. You have to string the chaludel. It doesn't come free. That's what Chazal are telling us. Whatever it is. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
There's always an Indian when you have my Mori Chazal to mekayim them kipshutai. I just saw recently that Matzio Salman Shlita, Shavar Fush Leba, he says that when it comes by the Seder, he says you're supposed to be mechalik klois ve'goizim to the kids in order that they should stay up. So he says, Avada today, klois ve'goizim is not going to be them. You have to give them chocolates and candies, whatever. But there's always the in to mekayim the Maimer Chazal Kipshuta. He says at least one time during the Leila Seder, you should give out klois ve'goizim. Versteht sich, they can't be chametz because there's an in to mekayim Mamori Chazal have tifus, and you have to mekayim the Maimer Chazal Kipshuta. It would seem that after Chaim was also going like that. If the Gemara says Mavdala yain, yain ain't yain. Why did you eat and grape juice? But why did Mizaycha to the brachas of Hadlabanim Scharim? There's a mile of Mavdala yain. Akapanim, but the Magamisha takes us a step further, and he says, and Rabbi Chanan and Beir brings that the Yad Ramah also says this, that the pasuk of Lahavdal ben Hakodesh ben Achoyel is a makar for Havdalah. Lefidar Ramban, this is Moyerdik, because Lefidar Ramban, the mitzvah of Zocher is shaf the Kedusha Shabbos, or act as if I'm shafting the Kedusha Shabbos. That has no shaychus to Havdalah. Havdalah can't be learned out of Zocher. So either like we mentioned, Havdalah's drop on them, like the Magamish over there brings behemshich. There are many Rishayim Mitzhelgis, v'yesh aimim shavdalah eina ela b'divei seifrim. Or like we're saying now, the Ramban could also agree that Havdalah is deraisa, but not from Zocher, rather from the pasuk of Lahavdal. To say this da'anai mitzvah. There's a mitzvah, lahavdol ben hakodesh ben achol. There's a general klolis dikim mitzvah to be mavdol and to separate between kedusha and chol. Maybe we'll see more about this. So kumtei sefidar Ramban, kiddush and havdalah are not related. They're two separate chiyuvim. There's a mitzvah of zocher to shaf the kedusha Shabbos, and that's zocher shem Shabbos b'knisasai. No shaychus to yitziyasai. Then there's a new mitzvah to be mavdol between kedusha and chol. When a person went through a matzav of kedusha and now is coming a matzav of chol, there's a mitzvah to mavdol between kodesh and chol, and that's the mitzvah of lahavdol ben kodesh ben chol. Let's expand it. Let's be marked of this a little bit more. There is a Gemara in Psachim on Daf Kuf Yud Zayin and Abayz. The Gemara in Psachim says that there's a halacha that when a person makes kiddush, you have to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim. The Gemara learns from Gzer Shava, L'man tizkar es yom tzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha, and it says Zochar es yom Shabbos lekatshei. So if we learn from over there that the same way the tizkar is mentioned by Yitzias Mitzrayim, there's a halacha that when you say kiddush, you also have to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim. Kipshutai, this is a din deraisa. The Gemara makes a Gzer Shava. The Pashta says this is a din deraisa, that you have to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim and Kiddush, and that's taka unzere nusach HaKiddush. Unzere nusach HaKiddush has, you have it here in the Rambam. The Rambam says in Mefurish Halacha Beis, it's a Nevi Siddur. Tchilu Mikrei Kodesh or Kiyayim Tchilu Mikrei Kodesh Zeicher Yitzias Mitzrayim. You have to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim and Kiddush. Okay. What about Havdalah? Is there a halacha that you have to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim and Havdalah? Well, we know that we don't. Look at the Rambam in Halacha Gimel. Zed nusach Havdalah, Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, mavdol mekodesh hachol ben ha'olech ha'yeshech v'yisrael ha'amim, v'yim ha'shvi l'sheish tzemei ha'masa, Baruch Ata Hashem mavdol ben kodesh l'chol. There's no zecher about zecher l'tzias Mitzrayim. Effective b'chaschinuch hakasha. Effective b'chaschinuch, what happened to the halacha of zecher l'tzias Mitzrayim? If you're the Rambam learns that the mitzvah of Havdalah is learned out of Zocher, and the mitzvah of Zocher of Kiddush, the Gemara says we have Gzer Shava, Zocher Tizkar, that you have to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim in Kiddush. So like the Rambam, that Havdalah is also learned out of Zocher. So why shouldn't there be a halacha that you have to mention Zecher Yitzias Mitzrayim and Havdalah also? As effective b'chaschinuch, Abam b'kasha, as effective b'chaschinuch hakasha of the Rambam. Like the Rambam, that I'm learning Havdalah out of the mitzvah of Zachar, and there's a Mefurish Gemara that there's a Gzera Shava, that there's a halacha that a chiluk of Kiddush Deraisa is to say Zeichel Yitzias Mitzrayim. Why doesn't halacha apply to Havdalah also? Havdalah also there should be a din that you have to say Zeicher Yitzias Mitzrayim in Havdalah. So the Mechas Chinuch says that according to the Rambam, you have to be matchin, you have to say that even though the Rambam agrees that a Havdalah is learned out of the mitzvah of Zachar, but the Iker mitzvah of Kiddush of Zachar is to Mekadosh the Shabbos b'knisasai. The mitzvah of being Mekadosh the Shabbos b'tziasai, let's call it a tofel dika kiyum of Zachar. But the Iker mitzvah, the Iker kiyum, is to Mekadosh Shabbos b'knisasai. And that's why when the Torah says, somehow Chazal knew that when the Torah says Zeichel Yitzias Mitzrayim, it's not learned out. We don't learn that all the halakim of Zachar have the mitzvah, have the chiyuv of mentioning Yitzias Mitzrayim. It's only in the Iker mitzvah. And the Iker mitzvah is b'knisasai and not b'yitziasai. That's what Mechas Chinuch say. It's a daichik. He says it's a daichik. He says that you have to matcha according to the Rambam. According to the Ramban, it's beautiful. Mechas Chinuch himself says this. According to the Ramban, it's Eisen. According to the Ramban, Kushim Mekar Lesa Fakert. It's tfei under halachas. The halacha of saying Zeichel Yitzias Mitzrayim is a din in Kiddush. And the mitzvah of Kiddush is to shaf the Kedusha Shabbos. That's the mitzvah of Zachar. Havdalah is not a chiluk of that mitzvah. And that's when it comes to the mitzvah of Kiddush, there's halacha, there's a Gzera Shava, Zachar. You have to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim. When it comes to Havdalah is no shaychus to Zachar. Other Havdalah is Rabbanon. Other Afilu Begeit Zagan Havdalah is Deraisa. I'm learning out of the pasuk of Lahavdal. And the pasuk of Lahavdal doesn't say Zecher. It doesn't say Yitzias Mitzrayim. Therefore, there's no kasha. There's no chiyuv to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim and Havdalah because there's not a chiluk of the mitzvah. According to the Rambam, that the mitzvah of Zachar is Koilul Kiddush and Havdalah. There's a halacha of Zachar will be Knisasai, will be Yitziasai. So then we have the Mechas Chinuch kasha. Why isn't there a halacha that you have to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim by Havdalah also, if that's the second half, so to speak, of Zachar? But like the Ramban, that the mitzvah of Havdalah, I feel on the tzad that it's a deraisa. I'm learning out of the pasuk of Lahavdal ben HaKodesh or ben HaChil. It's extremely moving why we don't find in our Nusach Havdalah any mention of Yitzias Mitzrayim. That halacha is dafka halacha in Kiddush. Kiddush is halacha in shafing the Kedusha Shabbos. When it comes to Havdalah, which is a completely different halacha, it's a klolistic din of being mavdal between Kedusha and Chil. Over there's no din of mentioning Zeichel Yitzias Mitzrayim. Okay, let's go on about Havdalah. Let's try to be marked for this a little bit more. What about Havdalah on Yontif? What are the mitzvah of Havdalah on Yontif? So the Rambam, this Rambam is also Perek Chav Tes. The Rambam in Perek Chav Tes, Halacha Yud Ches. Talk the Rambam. Kashem shemekatshim b'leili Shabbos mavdilim b'motzei Shabbos. Kach mekatshim b'leili Yom Tovim u'mavdilim b'motzeihen u'b'motzei Yom Kippurim. Shekulam Shabses Hashem hein. Talk the Rambam. The same way we make Kiddush on Leil Shabbos and mavdil on Motzei Shabbos, so too we make Kiddush on Leil Yontiv and we're mavdil on Motzei Yontiv. The Lashon Rambam is Kemat Mefurish. This in the Rambam. The Rambam, as you mentioned earlier, says that Kiddush on Shabbos is deraisa. The Rambam says Havdalah on Shabbos is deraisa. It's Mefurish in the Rambam Kemat that not only is Shabbos deraisa, Yontiv is also deraisa. Kiddush on Yontiv is deraisa, and Havdalah on Yontiv is deraisa. And the Rambam adds a svara, Shekulam Shabbos Hashem hein, because they are all Shabbos Hashem. What the Rambam means to say is pashat, because the mitzvah of Kiddush and Havdalah, I learned out of Zachar Shabbos lekatshai. It doesn't mention a word about Yontiv. So Vikrich Teran Yontiv into the mitzvah of Kiddush and Havdalah. So the Rambam, because Yontiv is called Shabbos. There's a pasuk in Parshas, I think it's Parshas Taka, Parshas Emor, Milvad Shabbos Hashem. Yontiv is called Shabbos. Spal Yontiv has a Shem Shabbos. So therefore we can say that when the Torah says Zachar Yom Shabbos Akatshay, Yontiv is included in that mitzvah. And the same way Kiddush and Havdalah and Yontiv is deraisa, so too Kiddush and Havdalah and Shabbos is deraisa, so too Kiddush and Havdalah and Yontiv would also be a deraisa. Shekulam Shabbos Hashem hein. Let's take a look at the Maggid Mishnah. The Maggid Mishnah says of an art on it says where it says Yutes Chaf Aleph. I'm sorry, it's Yudches over here. Yudches. V'da, she'ein kiddush yontiv dvar Torah. The very last line. V'da she'ein kiddush yontiv dvar Torah. Zok the Magmish, you should know that kiddush yontiv is not midaraisa. The Magmisha doesn't mention that the Rambam said not like that. I think the Mechaschinach already is more this, but the Rambam Middle Chayres come out before that Kiddush Yontiv is deraisa, but the Magmisha says that Kiddush Yontiv is not deraisa. It sounds like it's saying in the Rambam, ich weiß nicht, I don't know, but L'chayra, the Rambam Lefanenu, it sounds like the Rambam is saying Kiddush is deraisa, but Akavada the Magmisha says clear the Kiddush Yontiv is not deraisa, and it's got how we pass him. We're passing this. Shagasari is a whole arichs about this. We pass the Kiddush Yontiv is not deraisa. So let's first focus on this. We have a machlekes, let's call it the Rambam, and the other Rishonim and the other Paiskim, if Kiddush Yontiv is deraisa or not. I think this is mamash lishitasei. The Rambam learns that the mitzvah of Kiddush is to mekadesh the Shabbos, to say divrei shvach about Shabbos. As the Rambam says, Kiddush Yontiv is deraisa because kulam Shabbos says Hashem. But it's more than that. According to the Rambam, it's taka makes sense that Kiddush and Yontiv should be deraisa. Because according to the Rambam, the mitzvah of Kiddush is to say the Maila and the Shvach of Shabbos. Why should Yontiv be any different? Yontiv is a Zman Kiddush. So if there's a mitzvah to be Magdil, the Yom Kiddush of Shabbos, and say the Maila and the Shvach of Shabbos, why shouldn't this mitzvah apply to Yontiv also? Now, of course, you need a Makar. So the Rambam says, Shakulam Shabbos is Hashem. But it's extremely mistaver, the Rambam Lishitasei, that the mitzvah of Kiddush on Yontiv should also be deraisa, because the mitzvah of Azovi on Shabbos, there's a mitzvah to say the Maila of the godless of Shabbos. That applies to Yontiv also. Yontiv has a Shem Shabbos. Yontiv is a Zman Kodesh. So Azovi, there's a mitzvah to say the Milas of the Zman Kodesh of Shabbos. There's a mitzvah to say the Milas of the Zman Kodesh of Yontiv. Havdalah Eichid. Noch the Rambam that Havdalah on Shabbos is deraisa. So the Rambam, Kach mekatshim b'leila yom tov mavdilim b'moitzo ehen v'motzi yom kippurim. Havdalah Yontiv also is deraisa because again, Kiddush and Havdalah are two sides of the same coin. The mitzvah of Kiddush and Havdalah, nach the Rambam is it's one grace mitzvah of Zocher that when it comes to Yom Kiddush, let it be Shabbos, let it be Yontiv, which also has a Shem Shabbos. There's a mitzvah to say the Maila of that Yom, and the way that you say the Maila of that Yom is by saying the Maila b'knisasei and by saying the Maila b'yitziyasei. Later Ramban, that the mitzvah of Kiddush is to say, not to say the mile of Shabbos, the mitzvah of Kiddush is to shaf the Kedusha Shabbos, to act as if I'm shafting the Kedusha Shabbos. According to Ramban, it's very mistaver that Yontiv should not have a mitzvah of Kiddush deraisa, because Yontiv, fakert, we shaf the Kedusha Yontiv already, I did the Kiddush Bezdin. That's the Gemara Psachim. The Gemara Psachim says that Shabbos is kvi v'kaima, and when it comes to Yontiv, we say Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim, Mekadesh Yisrael the Katshinu l'zmanim. The Kedusha's Yontiv is telling the Kiddush HaChodesh. When Bezin is Mekadesh HaChodesh, Bezin is taka shafing the Kedusha's Yontiv. That we don't find that there's a mitzvah to make a second Kedusha by Shabbos, where the Kedusha Shabbos is Chal Me'elav and Shabbos is kvi v'kaima. So Zok Damban, there's a mitzvah to be Makdash B'peh. And like we said, Azaydi B'char Behem Torah, where even though the Kedusha is Chal Me'rechem, the Kedusha is Chal Me'elav, but there's a mitzvah to act as if I'm taka shafing the Kedusha. By Yontiv, I'm taka shafing the Kedusha. Not me, Bezdin, but Klai Yisrael. Bezdin on behalf of Klai Yisrael, they're taka shafing the Kedusha Yontiv. I did the Kiddush HaChodesh. That's Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim. So there's another mitzvah to make Kiddush. There's a mitzvah to make another, to Mekadesh a second time. That you don't find. You find that a Kedusha that was Chal Me'elav, there's a mitzvah for me to act as if I'm taka shafting the Kedusha B'peh. But a Kedusha that I taka shaft already, Kedusha is until I shaft or Bezdin shaft on behalf of Klai Yisrael, I did Mekadesh HaChodesh. That's Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim. So there should be another mitzvah to make a Kiddush deraisa, to makdish Yontiv at Tzeitamol, Pazepis. So if you Ramban, it will be very moving, like the Magen Mishnah says, I like the Shagasari is Masik, I like the Shuguru Paskins, that Kiddush Yontiv is Drabanan. Milvad, that maybe it doesn't hold for the Rambam's Taina, the Yontiv is Ikri Shabbos. Look at the Mechaschinach, he has all riches about this. There's a lot of different things that are telling the Shaila, if there's Isser Shvisas Behemta at Shabbos, if Yontiv has a Shem Shabbos. Milvad, that Taina. But in Lumdus, the way the Ramban fresh days, the mitzvah of Kiddush, that the mitzvah of Kiddush is to shaf the Kedusha Shabbos, it's very mistaver that Kiddush on Yontiv should taka be Drabanan, because there's no inyan for me to shaf the Kedusha Yontiv again, because I already shafted, I did in Mekadesh the Chodesh. Okay, so that would be very moving why Kiddush and Yontiv is Drabanan, Kiddush Yontiv is Drabanan late Ramban. Now let's handle Havdalah for a second. How about Havdalah and Yontiv? Lefi, the Magid Mishnah and the Shagasaria, the Kiddush Yontiv is Drabanan. How about Havdalah? So Pashtus, you would say that Havdalah and Yontiv is also Drabanan. Havdalah and Kiddush go together. It wouldn't be Mistaver L'chayra that Kiddush and Yontiv should be the Rabbanan and Havdalah and Yontiv should be the Raisa. And I think as Taka the Pri Megadim learns, and the Chaschina brings down the Pri Megadim, that Taka says that if Kiddush Yontiv is Drabanan, Havdalah Yontiv also is Drabanan also. However, the Mechaschinach, he brings down that there's a Shita Mukubetzes in Beya, I think it's on Daf Gimel and Beis, that the Shita Mukubetzes is Mavur, that Havdalah is Deraisa on Yontiv. Havdalah on Yontiv is Deraisa. So could that stem with the Shitas that Kiddush on Yontiv is Drabanan? So I think based on what we said until now, this could stem very nicely. Actually, what I'm saying now is really Rabbi Chanan in Beya says this, that if you learn that the makar of the mitzvah of Havdalah is from Lahavdil bein HaKodesh bein HaChol, so then it's talking to say that Kiddush Yontiv is Drabanan and Havdalah Yontiv is Deraisa. Why? Because the mitzvah of Kiddush is a mitzvah of Zachar. The mitzvah of Zachar is, like the Ramban says, to Shafta Kedusha Shabbos. That mitzvah is only by Shabbos. That mitzvah doesn't apply to Yontiv for two reasons. First of all, Lav Dafka, we hold to the Rambam Sfara, the Yontiv V'Ke Shabbos. There could be a machlekes about that. And number two, like we explained, that later Ramban, that the Havana of the mitzvah of Kiddush is to Shafta Kedusha Shabbos, that doesn't apply to Yontiv, because Yontiv, we shafted already, I did the Kiddush Bezdin. So there's no mitzvah to Shafta Kedusha again. When it comes to Havdalah, the mitzvah of Havdalah, Nach der Ramban, either it's a Drabanan, or if it's a Deraisa, we're learning from Lahavdil. The mitzvah, let's handle the Deraisa. Let's say the mitzvah Deraisa of Havdalah, I learned for the pasuk of Lahavdil ben HaKodesh ben HaChol. That mitzvah is a klolis dig mitzvah. Whenever there's a matzav of Kodesh and Chol, be mavdil between Kedusha and Chol. It doesn't say Shabbos there. It says Lahavdil ben HaKodesh ben HaChol. There's a mitzvah being mavdil between Kedusha and Chol. Shabbos is an example of Kodesh. Yontiv is also Kodesh. Bishleima, according to the Rambam, who learns that the mitzvah of Havdalah is learned out of the pasuk of Zochar Shema Shabbos Lekatchay, and the Torah says Shabbos. The Rambam has to say that the reason why Havdalah and Yontiv is Deraisa is because Yontiv has a Shem Shabbos. So Zochar Shema Shabbos Lekatchay, which means B'Knisasai Ubi Yitziyasai is Kailul Yontiv also in addition to Shabbos, because Yontiv has a Shem Shabbos. But according to the Ramban, that they learned the mitzvah of Havdalah from the pasuk of Lahavdil ben HaKodesh ben HaChol, it doesn't say a word about Shabbos over there. It says Kodesh. There's a general mitzvah that when a person went through a Zman of Kodesh, there's a mitzvah to mavdil between Kedusha and Chol. That has nothing to do with Shabbos. So it's very talking to say that even if Kiddush and Yontiv is Drabanan, Havdalah and Yontiv could be Deraisa. And the Shita Mukubetzes in Beya is not a stira to what the Magid Mishnah and the Shagasarya say. The Magid Mishnah and Shagasarya, and which seems to be the Shita of Rav Rishonim, Rav Paiskim, that Kiddush Yontiv is Drabanan, as Taka the Meshur Paskins, is not a stira b'chlal to what it says in the Shita Mukubetzes in Beya that Havdalah and Yontiv is Deraisa. Because Kiddush, which I learned out of Zachar, and there it says Shabbos. So Yontiv is not included in Shabbos. Sai because it's not called Shabbos, and Sai, like we said for the Ramban, because there's no mitzvah to Bekadosh Yontiv if I already made the Kedusha's Yontiv. But when it comes to Havdalah, if I learn Havdalah from the pasuk of Lahavdil ben HaKodesh ben HaChol, where that's a general klolis dik mitzvah to be mavdil between Kedusha and Chol. It doesn't say a word about Shabbos. Yontiv is for sure Kodesh. Yontiv might not have a Shem Shabbos, but definitely has a Shem Kodesh. It's a Mikra Kodesh. So why shouldn't there be a mitzvah deraisa to mavdil between Yontiv and Chol? So the Kumta Chais that it's possible to say, it's not muchrach, but it's definitely possible to say that these two things are not toys of bezeh. It's possible to say the Kiddush Yontiv is Drabanan, based on how we're explaining Api the Shita der Ramban, and at the same time, it's possible to hold the Havdalah and Yontiv is deraisa, because Havdalah is not learned out of the pasuk of Zachar. It's learned out of the pasuk of Lahavdil, and in Lahavdil there's a general mitzvah Lahavdil ben HaKodesh ben HaChol, and that would include Yontiv also. Let's take this a step further. We know that in the mitzvah of Havdalah, so the Gemara tells us that we're mavdil in two places. We're mavdil b'tefillah, or mavdil ala kais. The Gemara in Brachas tells us a little bit the history behind this. The Gemara says that initially, Chazal were masaking to mavdil b'tefillah. It says midaraisa, there's no din you have to mavdil davka b'tefillah. You can mavdil azevi by kiddush. You say good Shabbos. You say good zvach. You say nusach v'avdalah. That would be a kiyum of Havdalah deraisa. Chazal were masaking that Havdalah has to be b'tefillah. The Gemara says in Brachas that initially they were masakin havdalah b'tefillah. Then when Klal Yisrael became he'eshiru, they became more rich and they were able to afford a kais yayin. Chazal changed the takana to mavdal ala kais. Chazru vehenu, when Klal Yisrael became aniyim, Chazal put it back in havdalah b'tefillah. And in the end, Chazal said, be mekayim both takanas. Be mekayim the takana havdalah b'tefillah and the takana havdalah ala kais. What is havdalah b'tefillah? The Gemara says, as we know, we say atachir antanu. The nusach of atachir antanu, we say in the bracha of atachinin, that's the kiyum of havdalah b'tefillah. When a person says atachir antanu, he's been mekayim the mitzvah of havdalah. Either he's mekayim the mitzvah of havdalah drabanan, or maybe he's mekayim the havdalah deraisa. Hain chazal masakin, the havdalah deraisa you have to mekayim in tefillah. That's a different shmuz. But chazal masakin a lashon of atachir antanu to be mekayim the mitzvah of havdalah of havdalah b'tefillah. How about when you have Shabbos that goes into Yontiv? When Yontiv is Chal Matzai Shabbos. So the Gemara says that we say Vatei Dienu, a different nusach. We don't say nusach Vatei Dienu, we say Vatei Dienu. It's before in the Gemara in Brachas that the nusach of Vatei Dienu was not niskan by the Anshe Knesset Sagadayla. Atach Antonu, the Gemara says in before in Brachas is a takana from the Anshe Knesset Sagadayla. The nusach of Vatei Dienu, which we say on Matzai Shabbos that goes into Yontiv, the Gemara calls it a marganisa that Rav and Shmuel were masakin in Bavel. It's a new takana that came many, many years later. They were masakin in nusach of Atei Dienu. And without verstehen, what's the pshat in this? What's the pshat? Why is it that Chazal masakin in nusach of Atei Antanu? And when it comes to the Havdalah of Motzei Shabbos to Yontiv, there's a new nusach of Atei Dienu which doesn't exist in takana of the Anshe Knesset Agdela. It's a later takana. The Rav says that they were masakin. Rav says they're masaking a marganisa tava. They're to save Atei Dienu. So there are many achronim that say that even if you learn Havdalah is deraisa, it's possible that the mitzvah of Havdalah between Shabbos and Yontiv is a drabanan. Now, what would the beer in that be? The beer is al pi the Ramban. According to the Rambam, who says that Havdalah deraisa, I learned out of the pasuk of Zachar, there's no svar to mechalik between Havdalah from Shabbos to Chol, Havdalah from Shabbos to Yontiv, or Havdalah from Yontiv to Chol. As like the Rambam says before, you have the Lashon Rambam in front of you. The Rambam says, "Umavdilim b'motzoi yom tovim l'chula shel moed u'v'motzoi Shabbos liyontiv." It's all the same din, because according to the Rambam, the side of the din Havdalah is it's the flip side of Kiddush. The din of Havdalah is to say the Maila of Shabbos b'knisasai and to say the Maila of Shabbos b'yitziyasai. So according to the Rambam, the mitzvah of Kiddush is when you're coming into a Zman Kodesh, a Yontiv, a Shabbos, say the Maila of that Yom Kodesh. When you're leaving a Zman Kodesh, a Yontiv or a Shabbos, say the Maila of the Zman Kodesh that you left. How do you say the Maila of the Zman Kodesh that you left? By being Mavdul and by saying that now is the Kumta Avacha Digatag, the Kumta Yom Chol. If I'm going from Shabbos to Yontiv, I also have to say the Maila of the Shabbos that I left, because Yontiv is the Kedusha Kala. Shabbos is a Kedusha Chamura. Yontiv is a Kedusha Kala. In order to bring out the Maila of the Kedusha Chamura of Shabbos, I have to be Mavdul between Shabbos and Yontiv. It's a din in Shabbos. The Shabbos is tone a Kiddush b'knisasei, and the Shabbos is tone a Kiddush b'yitziyasei. So nishknaf kamina, if the Shabbos goes into a chayil, or if the Shabbos goes into a Yontiv. But you have to mavdil after Shabbos. When Yontiv goes into Shabbos, that's an exception, because there you're going from Kedusha Kala to Kedusha Chamur. That's a Tveit Sugya. But you're going from Shabbos to Yontiv, the Shabbos is mechayev avdala mitzad. The zechiras shvach the Kiddush, the Shabbos is mechayev b'knisasei b'yitziyasei. That's all according to the Rambam. According to the Ramban, that the mitzvah of Kiddush on Shabbos to shaf the Kedusha Shabbos, and the mitzvah of Havdalah, like the Maggid Mishnah says on the side that it's a deraisa, I learned from Lahavdil. In Lahavdil, it doesn't say Shabbos, like we mentioned earlier. It's possible, like Rabbi Chanan says in Be'ah, that Kiddush and Yontiv could be a drabanan, and Havdalah and Yontiv could be a deraisa, because Kiddush is a Shabbos dikadin, and Yontiv, Lefi the Maggid Mishnah and the other Rishonim, is not called Shabbos legabizah, and therefore there's no mitzvah of Kiddush. Whereas Havdalah is not a din in Shabbos. Havdalah is a din to be mavdil between Kedusha and Chol, and Avad Yontiv is Kiddush. Is Kubda is fakert. Lefi that, let's say a person has Motei Shabbos Yontiv. Did you talk and say this? Many Achronim say this. There, even if you learn that the mitzvah of Havdalah is deraisa from Shabbos to Chol and Yontiv to Chol, But it's possible that the mitzvah being mavdul between Shabbos and Yontif could be as only a drabanan. Because if the side of the mitzvah of Havdalah is a klolistic mitzvah to mavdul between Kedusha and Chol, when I'm going from Shabbos to Yontif, it's not Chol. It might be the Yontif is a Kedusha Kala, but to say the Yontif is Chol Klapi Shabbos, that's not Mukhrach. And it's very mistaver to say that even if there's a mitzvah deraisa of being mavdul, being Kedusha L'Chol, which would be Chol Shabbos and Yontif going into Chol, but the mavdul between Shabbos and Yontif, where both are V'Shem Kodesh, just one is a Kedusha Chamur, one is a Kedusha Kala, it's itachin that then everyone would agree that it's a Din Drabanan. Oh, so now let's get back to the Hara we had before. The Hara was, why is Vataydienu a later takana from Rav and not part of the chiluk of the takana of Anshe Knesset Agdela? So this far I saw is a very chosh of a sefer. The sefer is called, it's a Kuntras Yidei Kiddush. It's written by a Grace Talmid Chacham. He gave you the sefer, Talmid Chacham in Eretz Yisrael. His name is Rav David Ayat Seinverth. He's a Reish Chabur in Mir Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. A Grace Talmid Chacham. He has a whole Kuntras. It's kedai to get a hold of Kuntras. Mir de Ketayra and Kiddush and Havdalah. See, he says the following. He says that based on this, he cited that the mitzvah of being mavdul between Shabbos and Yontiv is not the same mitzvah as being mavdul between Shabbos and Yontiv into Chol. So then you could hear say very geschmack. That's why when it comes to the Takanas Chazal of being mavdul b'tefillah, Chazal said that there's a din drabana you have to be mavdul b'tefillah, and Chazal were kevea nusach of atachenatanu. It could be that nusach the Anshe Knesset Agdela or the Misakin in the Havdalah Deraisa. Havdalah Deraisa, which if I learn out of Lahavdil, includes going from Shabbos to Chol or going from Yontif to Chol. So then that's Havdalah Deraisa. There, Chazal were Misakin to Mavdul B'Tfilah. When it comes to being Mavdul, being Shabbos Liyontiv, where that is not a din deraisa, because if you learn Havdalah from the Havdalah ben HaKodesh ben HaChol, the Chiv Havdalah deraisa is Kodesh to Chol. But the Mavdal between Kodesh to Kodesh, Yontif doesn't have a Shem Chol, Yontif has a Shem Kodesh. It might be a Kedusha Kala, but it's a Kodesh. So if there the Chiv Havdalah Mi'ikroi is only a din drabanan, it could be then the Anshe Knesset Agdela weren't Masakin and din Mavdal B'Tfilah. Rav and Shmuel came later on, and they were Masakin and Marganisa Tava, like the Gemara says. They're the Masakin of Vataydienu, a Nusach of Mavdal B'Tfilah. But it could be this takana, this Haisafa that Chazal Masakin to Mavdal B'Tfilah is only when the Ikr Chiv Avdal is Deraisa. If the Ikr Chiv Avdal is Deraisa, which is Shabbos to Chol or Yontif to Chol, so then Chazal Masakin to Mavdal B'Tfilah. Whereas the Chiv of the being Mavdal, being Shabbos Yontif, or that the Ikroi, the Fida Ramban who learns from La'avdil, which is only a Drabanan, so it could be then the Anshe Knesset Agdela weren't Masakin a Haisafa of being Mavdal B'Tfilah. Rav and Shmuel were, and that's where there's a later Nusach of Ataydeino. But again, this is only according to the Havan of the Ramban U'Di'imei. According to the Rambam, who learns that the mitzvah of Avdol Deraisa is learned out of the pasuk of Zachar. There's no makom to mechalek in Shabbos and Yontiv, and there's no makom to mechalek in Shabbos going into Yontiv and Shabbos going into Chol, because it's not a din of being mavdil between kedusha and Chol. It's a din in the Friedrich kedusha, the kedusha that you just went through. In order to bring out the mile of that kedusha, you have to mekadesh it b'knisasei b'yitziyasei. So it's nishkan afkamin if the Shabbos goes into Yontiv, if the Shabbos goes into a Chol. As long as I went through a Shabbos, that Shabbos is mechayah the kiddush, and therefore you have to be zeicher b'knisasei b'yitziyasei. So avada for the Rambam, azavis hakem mafurish in the Rambam, havdalah from Shabbos to Yontiv would be a deraisa. But upon him, if you learn from the Havdil, and you could be mechadish that havdalah from Shabbos to Yontiv is Rabbanon, that will be a makom to understand why the nusach of Ataydienu wasn't niskan by the Anshe Knesset Agdela, rather came later on from Rav and Shmuel. Let's go on to another Nakuda, which I think also will be very geshmak l'fidas Havana. I'm sure it's been discussed in the past that there is an inyan of making early Shabbos, and there's an inyan of making Kiddush during early Shabbos. This is a Mefurish Gemara in Brachas. Gemara, I believe, is on Daf Chav Zayin on base. Gemara Daf Chav Zayin on base says, Rav Tzoli Shal Shabbos be'erev Shabbos. So the Gemara says that you could daven Ma'ariv early, and you could also make Kiddush Miba'id Yom before Shkia, before Tzeisak Echav, even before Shkia, as long as it's after Plug. Roiv Yishayim learn that this is a gebayt in Taisa Shabbos. Because there's a mitzvah of Taisa Shabbos, or the deraisa, or the derabanan, being that there's a musik of Taisa Shabbos, so therefore that's considered your Mekadosh Shabbos, your Mekadosh Shabbos b'knis asay. So you do up. The Rambam Shita is the Rambam doesn't pass on Taisa Shabbos, not deraisa, not derabanan, and still the Rambam says mefurish that there's a mitzvah. The Rambam paskins the Gemara that you're allowed to Mekadosh Shabbos b'ba'ed yom even before Shkia. Now the truth is, the Rambam himself, Bavarn's shot in himself, and the Rambam says like this: the Lashon Rambam, if you have the Rambam in Perek Chav Tes, Halacha Yud Aleph. So the Rambam said like this: the Lashon Rambam is Yesh Leila Adam LeKadosh Ala Kais Mi Ba'ed Yom Af Al Pi Shelei Nichnesa HaShabbos. The Rambam says mefurish: Yesh Leila Adam LeKadosh Ala Kais Mi Ba'ed Yom Af Al Pi Sheloi Nichnesa HaShabbos. A person can mekadosh ala kais b'yom even though Shabbos wasn't nichnas. V'chein mavdil ala kais b'yom af al pi shadayinu Shabbos. This is not as well known, but it's a beforish Gemara in Brachas. The same halacha applies to Havdalah as well. That a person can make Havdalah even before Shabbos is ice. V'chein mavdil ala kais b'yom af al pi shadayinu Shabbos. Nazak the Rambam shemitzvas zechira la'imra bein b'shas knisasei v'yitziyasei bein koidem l'sha'a zu b'ma'at. Lashon Rambam is shemitzvah sechira la'imra bein b'shas knisasei v'yitziyasei bein koidem l'sha'a zu b'ma'at. So many achreinim say this. Shmuel Zofsky has arichas about this in Zichron Shmuel, that the Rambam Taka learns that the mitzvah of Kiddush is not totally in the Knisas HaShabbos. It's a mitzvah to say b'knisasei. B'knisasei means samach l'knisasei, even though it's not Shabbos. It has to be after Plag. You can't be Kiddush on Wednesday, Feshtetzach. But if you're samach l'knisasei, kima'at, whatever that shear is, the place can say the shear is Plag, but a person is samach l'knisasei, he could mekadosh Shabbos, even though Shabbos did not technically start. The Ram says mefurish, apapi shaloi nichnas Shabbos. And the emes is that the right to this is from Havdalah. The Rambam says, and it's really a mefurish Gemara Brachas, v'chein mavdal al kais mibayim apapi shadayinu Shabbos. What does that mean? That means that mikar adin, and we pass like this, al kaponim b'shas hatzchak, you can philosoph on this, that if a person for some reason can't make Havdalah when Shabbos is ice, he can make Havdalah pashtetzik without a nair and no besamim. But a person can make Havdalah with a kais, with the bracha baruch hamavdal baruch ad Hashem mavdal mekadosh shechel, even on Shabbos, even before Shkia. That's considered Havdalah. Samuchli tziyasei. It's mefurish Gemara. Rav tzoli shal motzoi Shabbos b'Shabbos. You could have Ma'ariv and make Havdalah after Chanatonu. Havdalah lakais even on Shabbos, even though it's not Oy Shabbos. Now Pashteitzach, he can't do Malacha. That's Pashat. Havdalah doesn't make it Oy Shabbos. It's still considered Shabbos l'chol dinim. A person is a B'chal Shabbos afterwards, he will be Chayiv Misa. But you're mekayim the mitzvah of Havdalah. The mitzvah of Havdalah is not to make Oy Shabbos. The mitzvah of Havdalah is to be Zoich the Shabbos b'Yitziyasei. Now this is very muvan. The Rambam l'shitasei, because the way the Rambam learns the mitzvah of Kiddush and Havdalah, they're both learned out of Zachar, and as we mentioned, the mitzvah of Kiddush and Havdalah is to say the Maila of Shabbos b'Knisasei and to say the Maila of Shabbos b'Yitziyasei. Zach the Rambam, it's b'chlal not muchrach that it has to be Shabbos to make Kiddush, and it's b'chlal not muchrach that it has to be Oy Shabbos to make Havdalah. Kiddush has nothing to do with making Shabbos, and Havdalah has nothing to do with making Oy Shabbos. Kiddush and Havdalah is a joint effort in the mitzvah of Zachar to show that Shabbos is under a tug. When it's Samuchli Knisasei, which according to the Rambam could mean even before Shabbos technically started, Afapi Shaloi Nichnas Shabbos, there's a mitzvah to say Divrei Shvach about the Yom HaKadosh, which is coming up. And Samuchli Tziyasei, even though it's still Shabbos, but Shabbos gate Baltarais, there's a mitzvah to say that it's a gate Baltarei Shabbos and it's a gate Baltar, it's kum Baltarai a Yom Chol, and to be mavdal and show that this Yom Kiddush that's about to leave is an under a tug. The mitzvah of Kiddush, the mitzvah of Havdalah, where it's a mitzvah to say Divrei Shvach about Shabbos, b'Knisasei v'Yitziyasei, is not totally b'chlal in when Shabbos starts, and it's not totally b'chlal in when Shabbos ends. This is very moving, like the Rambam. Now let's go back to the Ramban now for a second. According to the Ramban learns that the mitzvah of Kiddush is to shafta Kedusha Shabbos. If there's a mitzvah to shafta Kedusha Shabbos, it doesn't make sense, l'chayra, that there should be a mitzvah that should be shaykh to make kiddush if it is a Shabbos. Only the Rambam who learns that the mitzvah of kiddush is to say divrei shvach about Shabbos, the Rambam could hold l'shitasei that even if Shabbos didn't technically start, because the Rambam doesn't hold the Taisa Shabbos, the Rambam could learn that there's a mitzvah to say divrei shvach about Shabbos. But according to the Ramban, that the mitzvah of kiddush is to shaf the kedusha Shabbos. Now, even though the kedusha Shabbos is chal already, but there's a mitzvah to I should act as if I'm the one shafing the kedusha Shabbos. But it has to be that something. It has to be Shabbos. If it isn't Shabbos, so what does it mean that I'm not making a chalais kedusha lachar lamed? What does it mean I'm shafting the kedusha Shabbos? So in Echanami, the Ramban Taka will learn, like Roy Rishonim, that the inyan in making kiddush early is gebayt and Taisa Shabbos, either Taisa Shabbos deraisa or Taisa Shabbos drabanan. Just gonna have But the Ramban will learn, like Roy Rishonim, that the mitzvah that the inyan making kiddush before Shabbos technically starts is based on Taisa Shabbos. But what about the halach of Havdalah? We mentioned that the Gemara says that you can make Havdalah before Shabbos is finished. That everyone agrees to it, and everyone agrees that Havdalah doesn't terminate the Shabbos, is still considered Shabbos. So that's a right to the Rambam, that if Samach Litziyase is Lavdavka, then Samach Litziyase also Lavdavka. Oh, but it's Meridik, but it's Mamash Lishitase. According to the Rambam, it's Takatol Izabazab, because according to the Rambam, Kiddush and Havdalah are both for that of the same pasuk. It's Zachreu Biknisase and Zachreu Bitziyase. So nach the Rambam, Havdalah is a riot to Hishtikkel by Kiddush. If the din of Yitziyase is Lavdavka, and the mitzvah of being zeicher the Shabbos and saying divrei shvach b'yitziyasei could be fulfilled samuch liyitziyasei, even though it's still Shabbos. So the Rambam, the Zalbazach, when it comes to Kiddush, the mitzvah of Kiddush could be fulfilled samuch liknisasei, even though it's not Shabbos. But later Ramban, the two dinim have no shaykhs. Havdalah is a mitzvah b'fnei atzmai, and Kiddush is a mitzvah b'fnei atzmai. Kiddush, which is learned out of Zohar, Shem Shabbos, the Kachai, and the side of the mitzvah of Kiddush is to be mekadosh Shabbos. So there, Knisasa is davka, because it's davka if it's Shabbos. If it isn't Shabbos, it doesn't make sense to create or to act as if I'm creating a kedusha Shabbos if it isn't Shabbos. So the Ramban's going to have to learn, like the Rav Yishayim, that the inyan of making kiddush by Yom is gebayt in the midst of Taisa Shabbos. Mashakin by Havdalah, where even if it's deraisa, what's the makar for the mitzvah Havdalah? From Lahavdil. And as we mentioned, the mitzvah of Lahavdil is a close to a mitzvah, not to make it Oy Shabbos. My Havdalah is not mafkir the Shabbos. Shabbos is ice when Shabbos is ice. That's when Shabbos leaves. The mitzvah of Havdalah is to mavdil between kedusha and chayil. It's a general klolistic mitzvah, which is chayil Shabbos, is chayil yontiv. Whenever there's kedusha and chayil, to make a separation between kedusha and chayil. So there, even the Ramban agrees that it doesn't have to be ice Shabbos, as long as it's samuch liyitziyasei, as long as Shabbos is about to leave. That's also considered a kiyum of Yitziyasei, and I can mekayim the mitzvah of being mavdil. It's still Shabbos, but I was mekayim the mitzvah of being mavdil, being kodesh v'chayil, al yedei being mavdil, somuch liyitziyasei. I just want to furious with one more nekuda, which is very geshmak, and that is like this. There is, I'm sure this was discussed in the past. Let's say a person did not make kiddush b'leil Shabbos. So there's a mefurish gemara in Pesachim, it's often alachan shulchan aruch. You can make kiddush the whole Shabbos. The same halacha applies to Havdalah also. If a person did not make Havdalah on Matzai Shabbos, we paskin, it's also based on the Gemara Pesachim, that you can make Havdalah ad Yom Shlishi, because the Gemara says the first 3 days of the week are Nigrar Achar Shabbos. From Wednesday and on is already shaykh to the following Shabbos, but until Tuesday, V'ad B'chlal, you can still make kiddush, you can still make Havdalah. There's a very big shal in the Achreinim, the Mechas Chinuch is very marich about this, some sefer, about what's the lumdus of this halacha. Let's take Kiddush for Kiddush and Havdalah. Is this a halacha that's the Ikr Zman HaMitzvah? The mitzvah is to make l'chatchila. The mitzvah of Kiddush is to make Kiddush b'knisas b'leil Shabbos. That's the Ikr Zman HaMitzvah. If a person did make Kiddush b'knisas Shabbos, there's still a mitzvah to make Kiddush the whole Shabbos, but you're not mekayim. It's not tashlumin. That's the Ikr mitzvah of Kiddush, or so too by Havdalah. The Ikr mitzvah, the Ikr kiyum mitzvah is Efshur mitzvah's reason. The Ikr kiyum mitzvah is to do it b'Yitzias Shabbos, Motzei Shabbos mamish, but you can still be mekayim the Ikr mitzvah of Havdalah until Yom Shlishi of Shabbos. Oidilma, it's within Tashlumin. That maybe the mitzvah of Kiddush and Havdalah is davka b'leil Shabbos, davka b'Motzei Shabbos. Now a din Tashlumin, kepshuta it's a din drabanan. There might be some makaris that it's a din daraisa, but there's a din of Tashlumin that a person can be mashlim As you find Tashlum by Tefillah, there's a musig of Tashlumin by Kiddush and Havdalah ki mashlim until the whole Shabbos for Kiddush or until Yom Shlishi when it comes to Havdalah. There is a Chasam Sofer, a Myrdik Chasam Sofer. The Chasam Sofer is in Shuvas. Chaim Simen Yud Zayim. The Chasam Sofer wants to say a svara to be mechalik, why it's shaykh to learn that the inyan of being mekadesh the Shabbos the whole day is not tashlumin, it's the ikra mitzvah, whereas by Havdalah, the inyan being mavdal ad yom shlishi is within tashlumin. He brings rise that there is such a chiluk, and he says the svara is like this. The svara is, what is the mitzvah of Kiddush? The mitzvah of Kiddush is to mekadesh Shabbos b'knisasai. Knisa Shabbos is when Shabbos comes in. Shabbos, he says that Shabbos, the Knisa Shabbos is not just when Shabbos comes in. The day of Shabbos also could have a Shem Knisa Shabbos. Why? Because the Gemara says in Psachim that Kavod Yom is Adif Mikavod Laila. If a person has a choice, he should be Mechabed the Sudas Yom more than the Sudas Laila. So if I see that there's an inyan to Mahadir in the Sudas Yom more than the Sudas Laila, that advises that Kedusha Shabbos is Nitoisef Ha'ilach. Was mer megeit rein in Shabbos, so geht mer Shabbos. I mean, Nishmitzad halacha in the Inyanim Shabbai is Zichar Azai, in the Sfarim HaKadoshim, it's movor that the Neshama Yisera comes in Hisafos. There's one darga that comes Belil Shabbos. There's Nacha darga that comes by Nishmas, Shabbos in the morning, and Shal Shudas, Rav the Ravin. That's for sure. But he's saying even Mitzad halacha, there is a steiging in the Kedusha Shabbos. So it's kumtechayis that the Yom HaShabbos also is considered a bechina of a Knisa Shabbos because there's a greater Kedusha Shabbos by day. HaRav, the halacha is covered yom adif covered laila. Ismail Zaktach Sam Sefer, it's talking to say that by Kiddush, avad the Iker Knisa Shabbos is Belil Shabbos. But even if a person didn't make Kiddush Belil Shabbos, there would still be an Iker mitzvah, not mitzvah tashlumin, to make Kiddush b'yom HaShabbos, because that's still considered a kiyum of Knisasa. Even though Shabbos started Belil Shabbos, but being that there's a Hisafas Kedusha b'yom HaShabbos, HaRav v'azdar alach v'kavod yom adif mikavod laila, b'meila yom HaShabbos can bleiben noch HaKnisa Shabbos. B'meila, that could be, that making Kiddush b'yom, if a person didn't make Kiddush b'laila, could also be considered a kiyum of the Iker mitzvah of Kiddush. However, Zaktach Sam Sefer, what about Havdalah? Havdalah, the mitzvah of Havdalah is to make it be Yitzias HaShabbos. Yitzias HaShabbos means when Shabbos becomes ice and it becomes chayil. Once it's chayil, it's chayil. You can't steig in chayil. You can steig in kedusha. You can't steig in chayil. Once it became chayil, Sunday isn't more chayil, and Monday isn't more chayil, and neither is Tuesday. When it's chayil, it's chayil. Motzei Shabbos is chayil. Avada Motzei Shabbos has shirayim of the kedusha Shabbos, but mitzad halacha Motzei Shabbos is chayil, and it doesn't become more chulendik the further on I get into the week. Ismail Zaktach Sam Sefer. That's why by Havdalah, everyone has to learn that's within Tashlumin. You can't tell me that the din of being Mavdal Ad Yom Shlishi is the Iker mitzvah of Havdalah, because the mitzvah of Havdalah is B'Yitziyasai. The Iker mitzvah of Havdalah is to Mavdal B'Motzei Shabbos, which is the Yitzias HaShabbos. The Yitzias HaShabbos is the point, the transition from Kedusha to Chayil. Once you hit Chayil, Chayil is Chayil. It can't become more Chayil. Sunday isn't more Chayil. Monday isn't more Chayil. So by Kiddush, where I could steig in the Kedusha Shabbos, and I could say that the Yom HaShabbos is also considered a Knisa Shabbos, mitzad Allah kavod yom adif mikavod laila. So there I could say that even if one didn't make Kiddush b'Leil HaShabbos, the Kiddush b'Yom HaShabbos could be considered the Iker mitzvah of Kiddush. But by Havdalah, where the mitzvah is to be mavdul b'Yitzias HaShabbos, Yitzias HaShabbos is the transition of Kedusha to Chayil. Once it's Chayil, is Chayil. Sunday isn't more Chayil. So there, everyone's going to have to learn that it's within Tashlumin, it's not from the Iker mitzvah. Let's say a person, if it's Tashlumin, there's a svara to say that's only if the person wasn't Mavdul B'Shegig, as we see by Tashlumei Tefillah. If it's b'mezid, then maybe you wouldn't have Tashlumin. If a person was Potter, if a person was Nishtagadacht in Einin, or he was Potter in the Iker Zman, if it's Tashlumin, you can't have a chiv later on because you can't have Tashlumin if there's a chiv. If it's the Iker mitzvah, you could have a mitzvah Agabanim. That's the svara that the Chasam Sofer wants to say. Okay, I think we'll stop here. And again, a grace yeshkeich to the Olam and a grace yeshkeich to everyone. It's a myriad schus to be able to be in this, and the Ebershter Zalofin, that we shall be zeicher lahagdil, teire u lahadira.